Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces international condemnation for his wars on Gaza and now Lebanon. Yet opinion polls suggest his domestic popularity is rising from record lows. What does the future hold for Netanyahu and for Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has faced some of the biggest demonstrations his country has ever seen and is accused of war crimes in Gaza by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Just this week, governments around the world condemned Israel for attacking United Nations peacekeepers in Lebanon, where his military has opened up a new front. Northern Gaza is cut off and surrounded. Israeli airstrikes are killing displaced Palestinians in tents. There's no sign of an end to the war in Gaza, where the death toll is more than 42,000 and where Israeli captives remain. Yet at home, despite all this, Netanyahu remains in power, heading a fractious coalition with far-right nationalists. Recent opinion polls suggest his popularity is on the rise after hitting rock bottom with the October the 7th attacks. What's behind this apparent boost, and what's it mean in the long term? Can Netanyahu survive politically? And if so, what's it mean for Israel and the region? We'll discuss all of this with our guests shortly. But first, this report from Barbara Angopar.
Recent opinion polls suggest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is enjoying a boost in popularity. That's despite increasing international isolation as a result of the war in Gaza, a series of assassinations across the Middle East, and the military operation in Lebanon have been credited for his improved ratings. Thousands of civilians have been killed and injured. Israeli troops have also attacked UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, prompting criticism from governments across the world and concern from the UN Security Council. In a statement, Council members demanded all parties respect the safety and security of UN personnel. Netanyahu has defended his military's action.
Israel is not fighting UNIFIL. It's not fighting the people of Lebanon. It is fighting Iran's proxy Hezbollah, which uses Lebanese territory to attack Israel. Hezbollah attacked Israel last year without any provocation on October 8th, a day after the Hamas massacre. And it's continued to attack us ever since by launching over 10,000 rockets and missiles at Israel.
The Prime Minister built his reputation on protecting Israel, but that fell apart with the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel last year. Relatives of captives still held in Gaza fear they've been abandoned.
Think which current action you can take that can affect and promote the release of Daniela and all the other hostages. I just wish that the next time you call one of us, you will be able to tell us what you and your government have done in order to bring back our loved ones. Act as if you are saving your own child, and do the right thing.
Netanyahu was already facing major weekly demonstrations against his leadership before October the 7th, 2023. Public anger about a planned judicial overhaul and increasing pressure after he was charged in several corruption cases threatened his grip on power. Staying in office keeps him out of court. The war has battered Israel's economy. And despite the Iron Dome, many people are living in fear of air raids. Both Hezbollah and Iran have hit targets in Israel. Elections aren't due until 2026, so for now, Netanyahu remains at the helm of a nation at war on several fronts. Barbara Angopar, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this now with our guests today. From Tel Aviv, we're joined by Alon Pinkas, a former Israeli ambassador and advisor to the former Prime Minister Shimon Peres. In London, Nomi Bar-Yaacov, an international negotiator and specialist in international security. And in Oman, Professor Yossi Mekelberg is an associate fellow with the Middle East programme at Chatham House. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us on today's programme. Let me start with you, Alon, in Tel Aviv. Tell us the political temperature there at the moment. How much support does Netanyahu have for the things he's doing right now?
Well, I'll begin, Jamie, with a sort of an admission of guilt. I never thought in my wildest dreams that a prime minister responsible for the calamity, debacle, and catastrophe of October 7th would last this long. And I was proven wrong. Now, there are mitigating or extenuating circumstances. There are political explanations, but the fact is that a majority of Israelis, and that was expressed in various and consistent polls, had him had the majority of people not only wanting him to resign, but no one expected him to stay in power. And yet here he is, and here we are, and it is what it is. Now, as for the political temperature right now, look, there aren't any elections scheduled, meaning early elections. And so all the polls are just, a snapshot, an indication of the public mood at a given moment. Yes, there was a boost. Both you said that in your introduction, and your reporter said it in her background story. He had a boost after the killing, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And several, sort of impressive James Bondish operations in Lebanon restored people's faith and confidence in the military, and subsequently he was boosted in the polls. In most polls, most people still think he should not run again, and most people think he should either resign or not run again in an election. But like I said, I was wrong thinking he would last this long, and I may be proven wrong, or the public in this case may be the majority of the public rather may be proven wrong, and he will run. The question is, when will there be an election? And there's a political timetable, but I'm sure we can get to that a little later.
Yeah, let me bring in Nomi now. We go back earlier in your career. You were a reporter and you followed Prime Minister Netanyahu around. He's always been known as the great survivor. But if you go back a year ago, the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, when Israel was launching its war on Gaza, did you think that politically he would still be here now?
No, like Alon, I think very few of us thought that he would survive a whole year. It didn't look like that was going to be the case. The opposition was vast. There was tremendous anger and dismay at the way that he had allowed for the anti-democratic laws to be passed and then prioritized for the army to look after the settlers instead of looking after the citizens. So it's with the culminating in the 7th of October Hamas attack. So very few of us thought that he would still be around, but he's a master of survival. And it's not only that he will, in all likelihood, will survive until elections will be held, he will run again. And who knows what trick he's going to pull out of the hat.
Yossi, can I take you to Gaza? We had the anniversary, as we said, last week. 42,000 Palestinians killed in a year, many of them women and children. I want to ask you about what Israelis get to see about all of this, because if we judge the political situation and public opinion, we need to know what the Israeli media are telling people about this. For example, that camp of people displaced outside the Al-Aqsa hospital where those tents were set on fire. Most horrific pictures. Is this being covered by the Israeli media? And is it having any effect now after a year on the Israeli public?
Yes, I think the fact that, very tragic anniversary, a year after the attack by Hamas, that 1,200 Israelis were killed. And now we have 42,000 Palestinians dead. And to your question, I think most Israelis don't see the same picture that most of us see around the world. You can ask yourself, in the age of access to all different digital platforms, if it's just because it's not seen or shown on Israel TV or on other platforms, or there is a willful ignorance here, some sort of denial, not wanting to see what's happening in Gaza, and by that maintaining the support in things that probably most Israel by now should have questioned. Not the need for Israel to ensure security, not the need to respond to what Hamas did, but victimize entire population 2.2 million Gazan people that been displaced few times over, population that now on the verge of starvation, if not already suffering from starvation, no access to clean water, no sanitation. Some bakeries in Jabalia don't bake anymore. They don't have enough flour to make bread, and so on and so forth. So I think the Israeli media should ask itself question why they don't show all those pictures, because whatever the public in Israel want to support or not, at least they need to know what's happening in Gaza and then made an educated decision. And the same is for those who want to know. They can find enough on the internet, other platforms, but they don't, and then they need to actually to ask themselves why they don't want to see these horrible pictures from Gaza.
Alon, part of what, of course, has happened in Gaza is that there are still somewhere just under 100, we think, Israelis being held there. Now, the families of those were a potent political force, and there was big demonstrations saying there needed to be a ceasefire. Do you think that has now changed? Or is it that now those families are increasingly being abandoned by the politicians and perhaps by the public?
Well, they've been abandoned by the politicians from day one. And Mr. Netanyahu sacrificed them. He couldn't care less about them. He reneged on several deals to which he agreed previously and then changed the conditions and added stipulations and said that the time is not right and said that the contours are imperfect and so on and so forth, to the consternation and frustration of not only the Israeli public, but the American administration and others involved. So in that respect, and against, not only against Israeli political culture, but against Jewish values, what he has done is unfathomable in terms of the society and the value system with which we grew up, that no one is left behind. Certainly not in a war, and certainly, I mean, this goes back to Jewish scriptures of redemption of prisoners, and so on and so forth. But you asked specifically, James, about the public. You still see. I live about 100 meters away from the where the center of the family's demonstration or the family gathering is, and they're still there. They are still there every day. But there's no question about it that the mass demonstrations that people had expected waned to a large degree. The press is not as adamant in covering it, and Mr. Netanyahu succeeded in tranquilizing the public into thinking that this is no longer an issue. Now, the odd thing, and this is sort of linked to what was just previously said, by Mr. Mekelberg, and that is that Mr. Netanyahu is linking this to some amorphous and abstract and totally unfeasible concept of total victory, and a bogus myth about how only military pressure would secure their release. None of that is true. None of that was ever true. Yet there seems to be not only fatigue in the public, but a total missing in action performance by the Israeli political opposition, which is nowhere to be found. They're just either
let me bring in Nomi on that, because there was the basis of a ceasefire deal. It was even endorsed by a UN Security Council resolution. Netanyahu had his own objections, we know. Has he paid any political cost for that? Is there anyone in the Israeli political spectrum saying you should have taken that ceasefire deal in Gaza, and that would actually have stopped the missiles coming from the north from Hezbollah in Lebanon?
No one in the Israeli left did enough to persuade Netanyahu to accept the deal. He's been marginalizing even his own defense minister and even his own negotiators. So he's given the negotiators, the head of Mossad and the head of the Israeli internal security forces, the Shin Bet, a very limited mandate. And often he has just taken the decision to mount more and more obstacles without even informing them. So this has been a pattern now for over a year. And the answer to your question, whether he has paid any political cost, is no. He certainly hasn't. There have been some television programs interviewing some of the negotiators. There has been criticism of him, but no one has been able to persuade him to accept the deal that he himself had agreed to with President Biden.
Yossi,
so it's quite shocking, and we're not seeing any change. If I may say one more thing that's relevant, James, I think that the only way forward now is, as actually Alon has written in Haaretz, President Biden has 99 days until the next president comes into office on the 20th of January, and that's a very long period of time. And that's the time in which the US should put a ceasefire deal, a take-it-or-leave-it deal. We've had much discussion about the take-it-or-leave-it, but it actually hasn't happened. And I think one has to link Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran, and it's really for the US with Gulf allies to put the proposal forward with a yes or no answer.
OK. Yossi, Alon earlier on said the thing that really changed things was what has happened in the last month or so in Lebanon. We had the explosions of pagers and walkie-talkies, but then we had the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. Are there any political figures in Israel who are now opposing the Lebanon operation? And are there not worries about some that they might get bogged down in a very long war?
I think, James, Israel suffers from very weak opposition. No one actually presents an alternative, a viable alternative to Netanyahu. Even when they present themselves as someone that would like to be in power after Netanyahu, they introduce to the public something very similar, not something which is different, fundamentally different, to let the voters in Israel, the public, to make a choice. And in this sense, to your question, no, I think there is a wide support for the operation in Lebanon. And again, I think sometimes when Israel has legitimate objectives, for instance, to bring back the 60,000 displaced to the north of Lebanon to end, it's the means that it's using. The way that it's maximum military force, no diplomacy, no political endgame. And this creates usually the dissonance between what, we talked about, whether it's pager and walkie-talkies or no, managing to eliminate the leadership of Hezbollah or Hamas, but to what end? And there is no political end, which is a peaceful now. And now, only today we heard on Al Jazeera, Naim Qassam, from the Hezbollah, actually says there is a link between Gaza and Lebanon. So it creates also opportunities there. And Nomi mentioned the United States in the election. So there is some window there that you can use as an opportunity between American election, the link between Gaza and Lebanon, and try to bring diplomacy into that. But right now, there is no government in Israel that would like to move into the diplomatic sphere. It rather stay in the military sphere.
Alon, I mean, if those 60,000 people don't get back to their homes that Yossi was talking about, and we've seen, attacks on Israel, attack by Iran on Tel Aviv. We've seen drone attacks recently, Israeli soldiers killed at a military training base near Haifa. If this continues, how quickly could Netanyahu hemorrhage political support, do you think?
Well, Lebanon has a bad reputation of doing exactly that. That is sucking everyone into a vortex or a quagmire. Use the cliche or the euphemism that you like better. And I think that if Israel is bogged down, and it's very much on the way of being bogged down, because, the moment I knew this was going to be prolonged and complicated is the moment that Israel announced ceremoniously that this is a small-scale, limited ground operation. That's how 1982 began, that's how 2006 began, and that is how 2024 began as well. Now, as for what Yossi just said a moment ago, and I completely agree with him, it's not just a total support for a military operation. It's like a chorus of fools that no one is questioning, not just the military operation, but the fact that on three fronts, Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran, Israel is using military means that are completely non-aligned with any coherent political objectives. Now, once that, back to your original question, once that becomes obvious in Lebanon, Mr. Netanyahu may be hemorrhaging. But I got to tell you, I don't want to sound too political here. I hope he doesn't make it politically until then, because this is the price that will be exacted on Israel is too high a price to pay, given what has happened on October 7, 2023.
Nomi, you heard Alon talk there about the three fronts. Now, the one we haven't talked about much yet is Iran, because, of course, on the 1st of October, Iran launched almost 200 missiles towards Tel Aviv. Israel has promised a response to this. The defence minister said it will be deadly precise and, above all, surprising, but nothing has happened yet. How much disagreement is there among the political elite, both in the government and outside the government, on what to do? Because let me read the words of the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. We must act now to destroy Iran's nuclear programme, its central energy facilities, and to fatally cripple this terrorist regime. Now, Netanyahu is going to have great pressure from the Biden administration not to tank the world economy in the days before a US election.
Yes, I think Netanyahu's under pressure both from President Biden in the US and from the Gulf states that have diplomatic relations with Israel. Because if Israel were to attack the oil refineries in Iran, they would, in all likelihood, attack the oil refineries in the Gulf. So it's plus Iran leases an island with oil refineries to China. So you're basically expanding the war into a kind of global war, not just a war in the Middle East. So I think the pressure on Netanyahu isn't coming from within, it's coming from outside, both, as I said, from the US and from the Gulf states that have diplomatic relations with Israel, or those that they were about to have diplomatic relations with until 7th of October happened.
Yossi, all three of you, I think, have said that the Israeli opposition is not doing particularly well at this time. But perhaps you could give us an idea of who that is, because we hear the names, and we've heard them many times before. Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, Naftali Bennett, who I thought had retired from politics but seems to have come back. Even the Defence Minister Gallant. Who is the most, dangerous challenger, would you say, to Netanyahu at this stage?
Yeah. Let me just first to say there is another front in the West Bank, and we forget it, that there is a front there as well. And this is getting more and more violent, and I think it's worth mentioning. As for opposition, the head of the opposition right now is Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, Gadi Eisenkot. We can throw a lot of names into the mix, but for me, more important to see whether they stand for something different. And I'll give you one example. When the coalition tabled the bill a few weeks ago about basically that a Palestinian state Israel will never agree to a Palestinian state, it was only the Israeli Palestinian parties that supported, including, for instance, the former Prime Minister Lapid, that only 2 years ago on the United Nations General Assembly said that this is the only solution, the two-state solution. His party abstained. What left of Labour, they abstained. Benny Gantz and his party abstained. So the question that we need to ask ourselves, if there is a true alternative. So we see, the right and the far right in Israel, they present something which I think we are on the panel completely disagree. But we would expect the opposition and all these figures that we mentioned to present a viable alternative, a policy, a coherent policy that will tell the public, if you vote for us, you'll get something different. You get, for instance, a ceasefire. The hostages is our first priority. Ending the war with an agreement, move to a big peace process, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of issues in Israel, and I don't see any alternative right now.
Alon, let me bring you in on that, because all of the major world powers do agree, or at least in their public positions, that there should be a two-state solution. We've just heard from Yossi that there doesn't seem to be anyone left in Israel, or hardly anyone left, who supports the idea. This is a fundamental problem for Israel politically going forward, is it not?
Yeah, Yossi is absolutely right. I mean, all three of us, I think, would agree on that. Look, the Israeli political, and I know these people very well for many years, and there's no level of disappointment that I can express on this show without being rude, impolite, and using profanities. This is not just complicity and incompetence. This is just basically standing up for nothing. Now, let me put it in a different way. In short, it's okay to oppose the two-state solution on grounds of feasibility and governability and implementability and whatever, as long as you come up with an alternative model. There is no alternative model. I mean, there is one, the one-state binational solution. Check with those politicians, invite them to your show and ask them if they support the one binational state model. They will stand up and leave your studio or your Zoom. So they're against a one-state solution. They're against the two-state solution. They seem to, mumble every now and then that the occupation must end. But effectively, they stand for nothing. And that mortgages Israel's entire future. And I'm not talking 50 years from now. I'm talking 5-7 years from now. Because, and I'll end with this, imagine the following scenario, which has been simulated in the IDF planning and intelligence branch several times. Imagine the Palestinian Authority disbanding voluntarily and saying, effectively, you want us, you have us. All we ask is one man, one vote. We accept that the two-state model lost its relevance and viability. We cannot govern contiguously on a geographic basis. We cannot govern on an economic basis, and you're not allowing us to govern on a political basis. So here we are, annex us, as you say and threaten and wish for many years. We ask for one man, one vote. What would Israel do then? If you think this is me just, fantasizing or inventing, no, this could happen in the next few years in the absence of a more durable and serious and meaningful solution.
Nomi, can I just bring you in at the end then, very quickly? I'm going to ask you to use your crystal ball, if you don't mind. What do you think are the chances of Netanyahu still being in office by when the next election has to be held, which is 2026? What odds would you give him?
I think it's looking likely. I would give it high odds, unfortunately. I wish I were wrong. It's not what I wish for, but it's the way things are moving at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you, all three of you.
Growing support for him.
Thank you, Nomi. Thanks to all our guests today, Alon Pinkas, Nomi Bar-Yaacov and Yossi Mekelberg. For more on the situation in Gaza and Lebanon, stay tuned to Al Jazeera. You can find context and analysis too on our website, aljazeera.com. If you have comments or contributions, please post them on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can use X, where we are at AJ Inside Story. I'll see you back here very soon. Until then, from me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.